The CEO laughed first. That was the thing nobody in that boardroom forgot, not the laughter itself. Laughter in a meeting could be many things. It was the specific quality of it. The way it came out before the boy had even finished his second sentence. A short, dismissive exhale through the nose, followed by a lean back in the chair, the kind of lean that says, I have already decided this is not worth my full posture, he said, and he said it to the room, not to the boy. Where did they find this one? 22 people were in that boardroom. 19 of them looked away. 2 of them looked at the boy, one of them. A woman named Miriam Osei, at the far end of the table, the company's general counsel, who had been in this boardroom for 11 years, and had seen many things and said nothing about most of them, wrote something in her legal pad, and drew a box around it, and did not look up. The boy stood at the front of the room in a borrowed blazer that was one size too large and a tie his mother had ironed that morning at 5 a.m. because he had a 6:30 train. He was 20 years old. He had been an intern at Caldwell Vance Technologies for 11 weeks. He was one of 4 interns selected out of 240 applicants to present at the Summer Showcase, which was the event designed to demonstrate to the board and the executive team what the talent pipeline looked like. He had prepared for this presentation for 6 weeks. He had done 17 practice runs. His name was Darius Montague Holt. He did not look at the CEO when the laughter came. He looked at the slide behind him. He steadied his breath. He finished his sentence. The CEO was still leaning back when Darius moved to his third slide, which was the one that contained the core of what he had been building for the previous 2 years before he ever set foot in this building. And Miriam Osei, at the far end of the table, stopped writing. What the CEO did not know, what no one in that room knew except Darius and Miriam, who had just understood it from the slide, and a patent examiner at the United States Patent and Trademark Office, who had signed off on the filing 8 months earlier, was that the technology Darius was describing was already protected, already approved, already his. Patent number 11,432,817. Registered to Darius Montague Holt, age 19, of Decatur, Georgia. The CEO laughed in the first 30 seconds. By the time the meeting ended, he would not be laughing. And by the time the board met again, 6 weeks later, the question would no longer be what to do with the intern. The question would be what to do about the CEO. Rewind 2 years. Darius Holt had grown up in the kind of household where the power bill was a monthly negotiation, and the internet was a neighbor's Wi-Fi signal that reached just far enough through the wall of their apartment if you sat in the right corner of his bedroom. He had grown up in that corner. It became, by the time he was 14, the most productive square footage in the building. His father, Raymond Holt, drove a city bus in Atlanta. Route 11, 6 mornings a week. He left the apartment at 4:45 in the morning and came home at 3 in the afternoon, and he had been doing this for 16 years, and he knew every pothole on his route and every regular rider by name, and he brought home the same amount of money every 2 weeks, and managed it with a precision that had nothing to do with abundance and everything to do with care. He kept a binder, 3 rings, tabbed by category, that held every bill, every receipt, every renewal notice, organized by due date updated every Sunday after church. He had never, in 16 years, missed a payment or been late on one. Darius had watched his father maintain that binder his entire childhood. He had absorbed from it, without being taught explicitly, that attention to detail was not a personality trait. It was a practice. It was a discipline that you showed up for the same way his father showed up for route 11 at 4:45 in the morning, regardless of how he felt about it, because the bus needed a driver and the driver needed to be reliable. His mother, Cecile Holt, was a licensed practical nurse at a pediatric clinic. She worked 4 days a week and brought home clinical paperwork on the fifth, sitting at the kitchen table with her reading glasses on, reviewing patient notes with the focused quiet of someone who understood that a small error in documentation was not a small error in reality. She read everything twice. She had given Darius that habit too, the habit of the second pass, the read-through before you submit, the one more look that catches the thing you missed the first time. They were not people who talked about ambition. They were people who talked about work, about doing it correctly, about being someone that a system could not easily dismiss because you had given the system nothing to dismiss. Darius had gone to a public magnet school in Decatur that specialized in STEM. He had arrived as a ninth grader with a composition book full of ideas he did not yet have the technical vocabulary to describe. Not the same. Composition book, not the same county, but the same impulse, the same corner of a bedroom, the same quality of attention to a problem that hadn't been properly named yet. By the end of ninth grade, he had the vocabulary. By the end of 10th grade, he had the tools. The tool that mattered was programming. He had taught himself through a combination of online courses. The free ones, the ones you could access if you sat in the right corner of the bedroom, and a teacher named Mr. Andrade, who ran the school's computer science elective, and who had a habit of staying until 5:30 on Tuesdays to work with students who had more questions than class time allowed. Darius had questions every Tuesday. He stayed every Tuesday. By junior year, he was helping Mr. Andrade debug the curriculum examples. The idea that would become the patent began as a frustration. He was 16 years old, and he had a part-time job at a grocery store, and one afternoon, he watched the store's inventory management system fail in real time, flagging a product as out of stock that was sitting in 14 units on the shelf 6 feet from the terminal because the system's update cycle had not caught the restocking that had happened 12 minutes earlier. He watched a manager spend 11 minutes manually correcting the error. He stood at the end of his shift and thought about that 11 minutes. He thought about what it would take to reduce it to 40 seconds. He went home and sat in the right corner of his bedroom and started building. The core of the idea was elegant in the way that the best technical solutions are elegant, not because it was simple, but because it solved a genuinely complex problem with a mechanism that felt, once you saw it, like it should have been obvious. He was building a real-time inventory reconciliation algorithm that used a layered verification system to cross-reference point-of-sale data, restocking logs, and physical sensor input simultaneously, rather than sequentially, reducing the update lag from minutes to seconds, and eliminating the category of errors that came from systems speaking to each other. One step at a time instead of all at once. He worked on it for 8 months before he showed anyone. He showed Mr. Andrade first, because Mr. Andrade was the person he trusted most to tell him honestly whether it was real. Mr. Andrade looked at it for a long time. He asked 3 questions. Darius answered all 3. Mr. Andrade said, "I want to be careful with how I say this, because I don't want to oversell it, but I also don't want to undersell it. This is real. This is a real solution to a real problem. And it is not obvious. And I know it's not obvious, because I've been in this field for 22 years, and I didn't think of it." He said, "Have you looked into filing?" Darius said, "Filing what?" Mr. Andrade said, "A patent." The process of filing a patent at 17 years old, without money for a patent attorney, was the kind of problem that would have stopped most people. Darius was not most people in this specific way. He read everything about a problem before he concluded it was unsolvable. He read the United States Patent and Trademark Office's self-filing documentation. He read it twice. He found, through an online community for independent inventors, a retired patent attorney named Gerald Fitch, who did pro bono consultations for young inventors on the first and third Saturdays of each month via video call. He booked the first available slot, which was 6 weeks out. Gerald Fitch spent 40 minutes on that call. He asked Darius to walk him through the mechanism in plain language, and then in technical language, and then in plain language again. He said, "The thing about a patent is that it has to be novel and non-obvious. What you have to do is convince the examiner that no one else has already described this, and that someone skilled in the field would not have arrived at it naturally. Can you do that?" Darius said, "Yes." Gerald Fitch said, "Walk me through why." He walked him through it. Gerald Fitch listened with the specific silence of someone who has heard hundreds of pitches and knows the difference between what sounds like an idea and what actually is one. At the end, he said, "I'm going to help you write this filing." The filing took 4 months. Darius worked on it alongside his senior year coursework, alongside his shifts at the grocery store, in the right corner of his bedroom after 10 p.m. most nights. Gerald Fitch reviewed each section, sent comments, reviewed again. The application was submitted in January of Darius's senior year. He had just turned 18. The patent was approved 14 months later, while he was in his second year at Georgia Tech on a merit scholarship, 3 months into his summer internship at Caldwell Vance Technologies. He had not told the internship program about the patent. It had not seemed relevant. He was an intern. He was there to learn. He had not anticipated being selected for the summer showcase. When the program coordinator told him he was one of 4, he said thank you and went home that evening and sat in the right corner of his dorm room. There was always a right corner, and thought for a long time about what he wanted to say. He decided to present the work he had actually done, not a simplified version, not a concept sketch, the real thing, the thing that had a patent number. He put together the presentation over 6 weeks, 17 practice runs. His mother ironed the blazer's collar on FaceTime the night before because the blazer was borrowed and had a stubborn crease. He took the 6:30 train. He walked into that boardroom. The CEO leaned back and laughed, and Darius moved to slide 3. The CEO's name was Garrison Whitfield. He had been at the helm of Caldwell Vance for 9 years. He was the kind of executive who had been right often enough and loudly enough that the habit of being right had calcified into something more like certainty, the kind of certainty that stops asking whether it is warranted and simply assumes that it is. He had a gift for reading a room and a corresponding blindness for reading individuals, specifically individuals who did not fit the pattern of what he expected expertise to look like. He had looked at Darius Holt in the first 10 seconds and filed him under a category, the blazer that didn't quite fit. The youth. The internship program, which was a diversity initiative the board had requested 3 years ago, and which Garrison Whitfield supported publicly and regarded privately as a recruitment exercise for future mid-level hires, not as a source of anything that would end up in the R&D pipeline. He had laughed, and then Slide 3 had appeared on the screen. Slide 3 contained, in the bottom right corner, under a summary of the algorithm's core mechanism, a small gray text box. Inside the text box were 2 lines. U.S. patent number 11,432,817 registered. Darius M. Holt Miriam Osei had seen it first. She had leaned forward, slightly, the specific forward lean of someone who has recognized something in a document that changes the nature of the document. She wrote something in her legal pad. She drew a box around it. She did not look up. 3 other people in the room had processed the text box within the following 30 seconds. A product strategist named Kevin Park, who had been at Caldwell Vance for 4 years and had filed 2 patents himself, looked at the number, looked at the name, looked at the CEO, and then looked at his own hands on the table. An R&D director named Sylvia Crane, who was 51 years old and had spent her career building the kind of institutional instinct that recognizes real work on contact, sat up almost imperceptibly straighter. And the board's technology advisor, a man named Dr. Marcus Webb, who flew in from Boston for quarterly meetings, and who had been watching Darius's presentation with increasing attention. From the moment the algorithm's architecture appeared on screen, pulled out his phone under the table, and typed the patent number into the USPTO's public database. He read what came up. He put his phone face down on the table. He said nothing. Darius finished the presentation. 8 minutes. He answered 3 questions from the room. 1 from Sylvia Crane, which was detailed and technical, and which he answered in full, and 2 from junior board members that he handled with the calm precision of someone who has practiced for this room, even when the room turns out to be colder than the practice. He thanked the panel for their time. He picked up his materials. He walked out. In the hallway outside the boardroom, he stood by the window for a moment. The city was visible below. Atlanta, in late June, the summer haze on the skyline, the mid-morning traffic in the streets. He breathed. He thought about the practice run he had done at 11:30 the night before, alone in his dorm room, standing in front of a blank wall with his laptop on the desk behind him and his notes on a legal pad, speaking at full volume because he believed that the way you practiced was the way you would perform. 17 runs total. He had timed everyone. He had done run 16 with a stopwatch because he wanted to know where each slide fell, and he had done run 17 without one because he wanted it to feel like something he already knew rather than something he was still learning. He had given that presentation. He had said every word. The laughter had happened in the first 30 seconds, and he had not flinched, and he had not sped up, and he had not apologized for the slide, and he had not left the room. He had stayed. He had answered Sylvia Crane's technical question in full because it was a real question, and it deserved a real answer regardless of everything else happening in that room around it. What came next was not something he could control. He had made his peace with that in the elevator that morning, the same way his father made peace with Route 11 before every shift. You control the quality of the driving, not the condition of the road. He went back to his intern desk. Inside the boardroom, Garrison Whitfield was speaking. He was saying that the intern presentations had been, on balance, a solid showing for the program, and that the team should take a look at the pipeline for potential hires. He was using the brisk, forward-moving cadence of a man who has already closed the prior chapter and is moving on. He had not referenced Darius's presentation specifically. He had not referenced the patent number. Miriam Osei said, "Garrison." He looked at her. She said, "I need to flag something from the third presentation before we move on." The room went quiet in the specific way that rooms go quiet when the general counsel uses that phrase. Miriam was not a person who flagged things for procedural housekeeping. When Miriam flagged something, it was because the something had legal dimensions that the room needed to sit with. She said the intern's presentation contained a patent disclosure. U.S. Patent 11,432,817, registered to Darius M. Holt. I'd like to understand the company's current position on that IP, because if we proceed without clarifying it, we are going to have a problem. Garrison Whitfield said, "He's an intern. Any work product he produces during the internship belongs to the company under the standard agreement." Miriam said the patent was filed 18 months before he joined this program. The registration was approved and issued 3 months ago, before his start date. The work was entirely prior to his employment relationship with Caldwell Vance. The standard work product agreement covers work produced during the internship. It does not reach backward. The room was very still. Kevin Park, who had filed 2 patents and knew exactly what this meant, looked at the ceiling for a moment. Sylvia Crane looked at her notes. Dr. Marcus Webb, who had put his phone face down on the table, turned it face up. Garrison Whitfield said, "Get the legal team to review his agreement, and we'll circle back." Miriam said, "I am the legal team in this room, Garrison, and I'm telling you that what this company does in the next 30 days with respect to that patent and that intern will determine whether we are in a position of opportunity or a position of liability. Those are the 2 options, and I'd like us to choose deliberately." She said it the way she said everything, without heat, without performance, with the specific measured clarity of someone who has spent 11 years in a boardroom, making sure the institution did not hurt itself by moving too fast in the wrong direction. She said, "I'd like to speak with him today." Miriam Osei found Darius at his intern desk at 2 in the afternoon. She asked if he had 30 minutes. He said yes. They walked to a small conference room on the 14th floor, the kind that was used for calls rather than meetings, 4 chairs and a table and a window that looked out over a parking structure. She said, "I want to ask you some questions about the patent, and I want to be transparent with you about why I'm asking them. Is that okay?" He said yes. She said, When did you first develop the core mechanism for this algorithm? He said he had the original concept at 16 and had refined it for 8 months before showing it to anyone. She said, did you use any company resources, systems, equipment, or proprietary knowledge in developing it? He said he had not. He had developed it entirely on personal equipment in his bedroom before he was affiliated with any company in any capacity. He said he could provide documentation of the timeline if she needed it. The dated entries in his development log, his correspondence with Gerald Fitch, the filing records with the USTO. She looked at him for a moment. She said, you kept a development log. He said, yes. Mr. Andrade, my high school teacher, told me to date every entry. He said if it ever mattered, it would matter that the dates were there. She said, Mr. Andrade was right. She leaned forward slightly and folded her hands on the table. She said, I'm going to tell you something, and I want you to understand that I'm telling you this as a professional obligation, not as a personal favor. What you have is yours. The company cannot touch it. The timeline is clear, and the filing predates your relationship with Caldwell Vance by well over a year. What you have is also valuable, significantly valuable. The application this algorithm has in real-time inventory management across distribution networks is something the R&D division here has been trying to solve for 3 years and has not solved. I am not authorized to make you any offers, and I'm not going to, but I want you to know what you're holding before anyone else in this building tries to tell you differently. Darius was quiet for a moment. He said, why are you telling me this? She said, because this morning someone laughed at you and moved on. And I want to make sure you understand that the laughter was about him and not about the work. She said it without editorializing, without the moral weight that a lesser lawyer might have put into it. Just the plain statement of a fact that she felt he needed to have in his possession. He nodded. He said, I understand. She said, I'd suggest you retain counsel. Do you have a relationship with an attorney? He thought of Gerald Fitch. He said, yes. Gerald Fitch, retired patent attorney, first and third Saturday pro bono consultant, took Darius's call that evening. He listened to the situation in the time it took to describe it. Then he was quiet for a moment in the way that lawyers are quiet when they are organizing a large thing into smaller things they can work with. He said, you have documentation of the full development timeline? Darius said yes. He said, the filing records from the USPTO are public. The approval date is on the record. Darius said, yes. Gerald said, and the internship agreement, do you have a copy? Darius said his mother had kept a copy. She had read it before he signed it. She had flagged a clause about IP assignment and asked him whether it applied to anything he'd already developed. And he had said he didn't think so, and she had written call a lawyer on a sticky note and put it on the refrigerator. He had not called a lawyer. He called one now. Gerald Fitch said, I know someone who does employment and IP law. She's going to want to speak with you. Can you meet tomorrow? Darius said, yes. The attorney Gerald referred him to was a woman named Asha Devanand, who had 17 years of experience in intellectual property and employment law, and who had, over the course of those 17 years, developed a refined intolerance for the specific category of situation in which a person's Clearly established rights were being maneuvered around rather than directly contested, because the people doing the maneuvering were betting on the person not knowing what they had. She met with Darius and reviewed his documentation in 2 hours. The development log with dated entries from age 16. The correspondence with Gerald Fitch, timestamped. The USTO filing confirmation. The approval and registration record. The internship agreement, which she read twice, the second time more slowly than the first. She said, "This is clean. Your ownership is not in question. The dates make it unambiguous. What I want to understand is what the company intends to do, and I want us to be in front of that rather than behind it." She sent a letter to Caldwell Vance Technologies' legal department the following Monday, 3 pages. Established the timeline, cited the patent registration, noted the relevant sections of the internship agreement, and stated plainly that Darius Holt was the sole and uncontested owner of the intellectual property he had presented at the summer showcase. It was not a demand letter. It was a clarification letter. It said, "Here is what is true." It invited the company to acknowledge it. Miriam Osei received the letter before it reached the general counsel's office because Miriam had given Darius her direct contact information at the end of their meeting and had asked that his representation copy her. She read it in her office with the door closed. She read it a second time. Then she walked down the hall to the CFO's office. What happened in the following 6 weeks moved with the particular momentum of a situation in which every person holding information is aware that the information is going to surface fully, and the only question is the angle at which it surfaces and who is standing where when it does. Garrison Whitfield was informed of the letter. He asked the legal team to explore whether the internship agreement could be interpreted broadly, enough to cover prior IP. The legal team told him it could not. He asked whether the algorithm's novelty could be challenged. 2 external patent consultants reviewed the filing independently. Both confirmed its validity. He asked whether there were alternative licensing structures that would give the company access to the technology without a direct acquisition negotiation. The legal team said yes, but that any such structure would require Darius Holt's willing participation, which could not be assumed given the circumstances of the showcase. The board learned of the full situation at its quarterly meeting, 6 weeks after the showcase. The meeting had been called for its standard agenda. The patent matter was added to the agenda the week prior. Miriam Osei presented the facts. She did not characterize the showcase incident in detail. She presented the legal position, the IP ownership timeline, and the 2 external consultant confirmations of the patent's validity. Dr. Marcus Webb, the board's technology advisor, presented a separate analysis. He had been working on it since the day he had put his phone face down on the table. He had analyzed the algorithm's application across the company's distribution network operations, across its 3 largest client verticals, and against the competitive landscape of existing inventory management solutions. His conclusion was stated in 1 sentence at the top of his summary. This technology represents a solution to a problem that has cost this company's clients an estimated $47 million annually in reconciliations, errors, and manual correction labor. And it was developed by a 20-year-old intern. whose presentation was interrupted by laughter before it was completed. The board was quiet. The chairwoman, a woman named Constance Burrell, who had been on the board for 14 years, and who had, on 2 prior occasions, been the person who said the quiet thing out loud that the room needed to hear, said, "I'd like to understand what happened at the showcase more fully before we discuss the technology." Garrison Whitfield said, "The showcase was handled appropriately." The review process. Constance Burrell said, "I'd like to hear from Miriam." Miriam told the board what she had seen. She told it factually, without dramatization. She said the CEO had audibly laughed at the intern's presentation within the first 30 seconds and had made a remark to the room. She said she had flagged it at the end of the meeting, which was the appropriate time. She said she had spoken with Darius directly that afternoon, and she believed his understanding of the situation was now clear. She said, "I want to be precise about one thing. What we are discussing is not primarily a legal liability question, though there is a legal dimension. What we are discussing is a question of institutional culture. A 20-year-old inventor held a patent on technology this company needs, presented it to this room, and was laughed out of his presentation in the first 30 seconds. That is a fact. What we do next will determine what kind of company we are." She said it the way she said everything, without heat, with complete precision. Constance Burrell said, "Thank you, Miriam." The board went into closed session for 40 minutes. When it reconvened, Constance Burrell announced 3 resolutions. First, the board had accepted the resignation of Garrison Whitfield, effective at the end of the quarter, with a transition period to be managed by the CFO in an acting capacity. Second, the board had authorized the company's business development team to open formal acquisition negotiations with Darius Holt, with Dr. Marcus Webb serving as the board's representative in those discussions, and with the explicit understanding that the terms would reflect fair market valuation of the IP as established by independent assessment. Third, the board had approved the creation of an independent review panel for the company's internship and development programs to be led by an external equity consultant, with findings to be reported publicly in the company's next annual report. The board had also approved, by unanimous vote, a 4th item that had not been on the prepared agenda. It had been proposed by Dr. Marcus Webb during the closed session, written on a notepad in the particular shorthand of a man who has been in enough rooms to know what a moment requires. The item was this: beginning with the following summer's cohort, the Caldwell-Vance Summer Showcase would be rebranded and restructured. The new format would require written technical review by at least 2 R&D senior staff before any intern presentation reached the executive suite so that the work would be understood before it was heard. And the annual award given to the most technically substantive intern presentation, previously named the Chairman's Innovation Prize, which had never once in its 7-year history been awarded to a black presenter, would be renamed. It would be called the Holt Award. The company announced this detail last, in the press release that followed the board meeting. It was the last sentence of the press release. The sentence was, "The award will recognize the same quality that has always distinguished exceptional work, the willingness to stay in the room." Constance Burrell said, "The showcase was designed to give this company a look at what its pipeline holds. It worked. We saw what we needed to see, though not entirely in the way we intended. She did not say Darius's name in the resolution announcement. She said it in the letter the board sent him the following day, which she signed herself. It said, in the last paragraph, "You brought your best work to this room." That took a kind of courage that is worth naming. We intend to be worthy of it. The acquisition negotiation took 11 weeks. Darius's representation was Asha Devanand and Gerald Fitch, who had come out of retirement for the durations because he had started this thing and he was not going to miss how it ended. The company's representation was Dr. Marcus Webb and the business development team. The negotiations were substantive and specific and occasionally contentious in the way that serious negotiations are, but they were conducted with mutual respect on both sides, which is not always guaranteed, and which, in this case, was the result of everyone in the room understanding that Darius Holt had nothing to prove and nothing to concede. The final terms were not disclosed publicly. What was disclosed was that Darius received an equity stake in the revenue generated by the technology's deployment across the company's client base, a licensing fee structure that would be recalculated annually based on performance, a position as a technology consultant to the R&D division at a rate commensurate with the seniority of his contribution and the continuation of his Georgia Tech enrollment at full scholarship support from the company for the remainder of his degree. Legal observers and industry analysts who followed the case estimated the total value of the agreement across its components in the low eight-figure range over a 5-year projection. The company did not confirm or deny these estimates. Darius went back to Georgia Tech in the fall. He lived in the same dorm. He ate in the same dining hall. He sat in the right corner of his classes and asked the questions that needed asking. Because that was the practice, and the practice did not change because the circumstances had. He sent his father a photograph of the signed agreement. Raymond Holt printed it and put it in the binder, in its own tab, between the most recent utility bill and the next month's rent receipt. He updated the tab label on Sunday after church. He made sure the date was correct. His mother framed the original patent certificate. She hung it in the kitchen, above the table where Darius had done homework since he was 7, next to the window that got the good afternoon light. She bought the frame at a thrift store and painted it gold, and it looked, when she was done, exactly as it should. Sylvia Crane, the R&D director who had sat up imperceptibly straighter during the presentation, was appointed interim chief technology officer during the leadership transition. She reached out to Darius in October with a development proposal, a collaborative initiative to extend the algorithm's architecture into a new vertical. She sent the message at 11:30 at night because that was when she did her best thinking. He responded at 12:15 because that was when he did his. Kevin Park, who had looked at his own hands on the table when the patent number appeared, left Caldwell Vance 4 months after the board meeting. He went to a startup. The last thing he did before he left was look up Darius Holt's contact information and send him a message that said, "I saw what happened at the showcase. I should have said something. I didn't. I'm sorry." Darius read it on his phone between classes. He typed back, "Thank you for saying it now." He put his phone in his pocket and went to class. Miriam Osei continued doing what she had always done, reading everything twice, saying the precise thing at the moment it needed to be said, drawing boxes around the things that mattered, and not looking up until they were handled. She had written 4 words in her legal pad when slide 3 appeared on the screen that morning. She had drawn a box around them. The words were, "He doesn't know." She had meant it about Garrison Whitfield, about what he didn't know was in the room, about what was already on record, about what was already his. She had known from the moment she wrote it that the box would not contain it. True wealth is what you give back when nobody's watching. Raymond Holt gave his children a binder and a practice, and the certainty that the road conditions do not determine the quality of the driving. Cecile Holt gave them a second pass, a read-through, a careful eye on the document before you sign it. Gerald Fitch gave 8 months of pro bono Saturdays to a teenager with a composition book and an idea that he could not yet prove was real. Miriam Osei gave 30 seconds of honesty in a conference room on the 14th floor, looking at a 20-year-old man who had just been laughed at and saying the laughter was about him and not about the work. Every one of them gave something back when nobody was watching. The patent existed before the room. The algorithm existed before the internship. The work existed before the recognition, as it always does, as it must. That is how it always goes in the real version of this story. The real version is never the moment in the boardroom. The real version is a 16-year-old in the right corner of his bedroom at 10 p.m., watching an inventory system fail and thinking 11 minutes, and beginning to count. The part that stays with me in this story is not the acquisition. It is not the resignation, or the board resolution, or the gold-painted thrift store frame above the kitchen table. The part that stays with me is a sticky note on a refrigerator in Decatur, Georgia, written by a woman who read an internship agreement before her son signed it and flagged a clause, and wrote 3 words on a sticky note: call a lawyer. He didn't, not right away. But she had already put the note on the refrigerator, which means she had already done her job. She had read the document. She had noticed the thing that needed noticing. She had named it, specifically, and put it where he would see it. He called later, when it mattered, because the note was still there. Here is what I think about when I think about that note. Most of us have had the moment where we saw something or knew something, and we wrote it down, or we said it out loud, or we thought it clearly. And then we let the moment pass, and we did not act on it. Not because we were cowardly, just because the moment didn't seem urgent enough yet. Because nothing terrible had happened yet. Because we told ourselves we'd handle it when it came up. And then it comes up, and you are grateful, or you are not, depending on whether you put the note on the refrigerator. So the question I want to leave you with is not about whether you are brave enough to speak up in a boardroom. Most of us are not in boardrooms. The question is smaller and harder than that. What is the note you have not yet put on the refrigerator? 1 word. Leave it in the comments. Not the whole situation. Just the 1 word that you would put on the note if you wrote it right now. If this story found someone today who is sitting in a hallway after being laughed at, send it to them. You don't have to explain it. They will know why you sent it. Subscribe if you haven't yet. Every week, a quiet person, a loud world, a record that the quiet person kept when nobody asked them to. Next time, a dishwasher at a Michelin-starred restaurant has been writing critiques of the menu in a notebook he keeps in his locker for 3 years. The chef finds the notebook. What happens next rearranges everything. The chef thought he knew about where ideas come from. You will not want to miss that one. True wealth is what you give back when nobody's watching. I see you there. 3 months after the Caldwell-Vance agreement was signed, Darius drove back to Decatur on a Saturday morning. He had been doing this more or less every other weekend since he started at Georgia Tech, because Decatur was 40 minutes from campus, and because his mother made a pot of something on Saturday mornings, and because some habits are not habits exactly, but more like the infrastructure of a life. The things you keep doing, not out of obligation, but out of the understanding that they are part of how you stay oriented. He went to his old high school. It was a Saturday, so the building was empty, but Mr. Andrades had said to come by at 10. He was in the computer science room, as expected, because Mr. Andrade spent most Saturdays in the computer science room, grading or prepping, or simply sitting in the place where he did his best thinking. Darius sat across from him at one of the student desks. The same desk, approximately, where he had first shown Mr. Andrade the algorithm 3 years prior. He had been 17, and the desk had felt like the right size, and now it felt smaller, or he felt larger, which was probably the same thing. He told Mr. Andrade what had happened. The full version, not the version that had been in the news. He told him about the 30 seconds of laughter and the borrowed blazer and the slide with the patent number and Miriam Osie's 4 words on the legal pad. He told him about Gerald Fitch and Asha Devanand and the 11 weeks of negotiations. He told him about his mother's gold-painted frame and his father's binder and the new tab. Mr. Andrade listened, the way he had always listened, which was with his full attention and without filling the pauses. When Darius finished, Mr. Andrade was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Do you remember what you came in here with? The first time?" Darius said, "The grocery store thing. The inventory error." Mr. Andrade said, "You came in here with a problem you had watched for 11 minutes. You had watched this thing fail, and you had counted. 11 minutes. Most people watch something fail, and they categorize it, and they move on. You counted. You are a person who counts. And the counting is the thing. The rest is what happens when you let the counting lead." He said it the way he said things. Precisely, without sentiment, with the plainness of a teacher who has found that the plain version lands harder than the decorated one. Darius said, "I wanted to come and tell you because you were the first person who told me it was real." Mr. Andrade said, "It was always real. I just confirmed that you were allowed to believe it." Darius drove home afterward with the windows down. Late October in Atlanta. The air with that particular quality it gets in October, cooler and cleaner than July. The city sitting lower in the sky somehow, the light more specific. He called his father from the car. Raymond Holt answered on the second ring, which was how Raymond Holt answered all calls, because he felt that a third ring sent a message he did not intend to send. Darius said, "Hey, Dad." Raymond said, "Hey, you eat?" Darius said, "I'm heading home now." Raymond said, "Good. Your mother made something." Darius said, "I know." They did not talk about the acquisition. They did not talk about the board meeting or the patent or the gold-painted frame. They talked about the drive and the traffic and whether Darius had gotten enough sleep, which was a question Raymond Holt had been asking him since he was 6 years old and showed no signs of stopping. When Darius pulled into the parking lot of his parents' building and cut the engine, he sat for a moment. He thought about the corner of his childhood bedroom, the specific angle of the desk lamp on the wall, the way the neighbor's Wi-Fi signal had been just strong enough if you sat close to the wall, the composition books he had filled, the problems he had counted, the things he had made in the space between late and very late, when the city outside was quiet and the only sound was the one he was building toward. He thought about a 16-year-old watching a system fail and thinking, 11 minutes. I can do better than 11 minutes. He had not known then where that thought was going. He had just followed it. Carefully, patiently, with dated entries and a retired attorney on a Saturday video call and a high school teacher who stayed until 5:30 and a mother who read everything twice and a father who put everything in a binder by due date and a patent examiner at the United States Patent and Trademark Office who had looked at the mechanism of a 19-year-old's idea and decided it was novel and non-obvious and signed off on it. All those people, all that patient, unglamorous giving back, in the particular darkness of the times when nobody was watching and the only thing in the room was the work and the question of whether you were going to stay with it. He had stayed with it. The work had not asked him to be thanked. The work had asked him to be precise, to date the entries, to do the second draft, to make the call, to sit in the right corner. He got out of the car. He went upstairs. He ate something his mother had made. He held his head up the whole time, because that was the practice, and the practice was what it had always been.